I am standing in a ballroom with 200 guests, feeling the cool, polished Italian marble right through the thin soles of my clearance rack heels. Above me, 3 massive crystal chandeliers are throwing fractured, dazzling light across pristine white tablecloths. It is a scene straight out of a luxury magazine. Everything is perfect. Everything is calculated. And then I look down at my place setting. My name card doesn't say my name. It says, "Poor broke sister living off her brother." It is printed on heavy, expensive ivory cardstock. The calligraphy is flawless. Sweeping loops of gold ink. It is the exact same font, the exact same ink, and the exact same hand that wrote Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Whitfield for the head table. Whoever made this card took their time. They wanted it to be beautiful. They wanted the humiliation to be a work of art. The woman sitting to my left sees it first. I watch her mouth fall open in slow motion. She nudges the man beside her. A giggle escapes her lips, sharp and high, followed by a frantic whisper. Then the table behind me turns around. The laughter rolls out in a sickening, quiet wave that barely disturbs the massive floral centerpieces. But it hits me like a physical blow. 200 guests, my little brother's wedding day, and sitting 12 tables away, at the center of the head table, Gerald Whitfield is watching me. He has a very specific smile on his face. It is the smile of a man who has just swatted a fly and is waiting for it to stop twitching. I will remember that smile for the rest of my life. But here is what Gerald didn't know. He didn't know that the woman he was trying to break had survived things that would have crushed him. He didn't know that what he did next would cost him more than any commercial property he had ever built. And he certainly didn't know that by the next morning. Every single person in that opulent room would know exactly who I am. Before we get into exactly how a billionaire's ego got dismantled at his own daughter's wedding, let me just say this. If you have ever been laughed at by people who think their bank account makes them better than you, this story is for you. Hit that like button to show some support for the underdogs. Drop a comment down below if you've ever had to stand your ground against a bully. And make sure you subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss how this ends. Let me take you back 13 years. I was 19 years old, a sophomore at the state university. I was double majoring in business and accounting because my academic advisor told me flat out that was where the stable jobs were. I wasn't looking to change the world. I just wanted to be safe. I had a 3.7 GPA, a part-time gig filing medical insurance paperwork for minimum wage, and a tiny dorm room with a window that rattled so loudly when the wind picked up that I had to stuff rolled up socks in the frame to sleep. Life was remarkably ordinary, and I was deeply, profoundly grateful for ordinary. Then my phone rang at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday in late October. It was the police. My dad was gone. Massive heart attack at the logistics warehouse where he worked the night shift. They found him between 2 towering pallets of drywall. He was only 44 years old. I drove home in 3 hours, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles bruised. When I pulled up to our small rental house, my little brother Ethan was sitting on the concrete front steps in his flannel pajamas. He was 11. Our neighbor was standing behind him with her arms tightly crossed, already talking on her cell phone about which state agency to call. You see, our mother had walked out when I was 7. She left no forwarding address, sent no birthday cards, made no phone calls, nothing. It was just me, Dad, and Ethan, and now it was just me and Ethan. The state sent a caseworker within 48 hours. She sat at our worn kitchen table, pen clicking against her clipboard, and explained the reality of the situation in a voice completely devoid of emotion. Ethan would need to be placed in the foster care system immediately, unless a family member with a stable, verifiable income could assume legal guardianship. I was 19. I worked 12 hours a week filing claims. I shared a dorm room with a girl who left her dirty laundry on my bed. But I looked at my brother, who was staring at his shoes, terrified to even breathe. I signed the guardianship papers with hands that had not stopped shaking for 3 days. The following Monday, I officially dropped out of college. I packed up my dorm, drove home, and found 2 jobs. My day shift was working as a clerical assistant at a local plumbing supply company. My evenings were spent tutoring middle school math at the community center. Ethan got the only real bedroom in our new, cheaper apartment. I took the living room couch. That apartment had a radiator that clanged like a hammer against a pipe all night long. And the rent was something I could only cover if I skipped lunch 3 days a week. I didn't choose that life, but I chose him. 13 years is a very, very long time to sleep on a lumpy couch. But here's the thing about survival that people who have never struggled don't understand. You just keep going. You keep going because stopping means losing the only thing you have left. And then one day, you look up and realize that while you were just trying to survive, you actually built something beautiful. Ethan graduated high school with high honors. He got a full academic scholarship to the state university, the exact same school I had to drop out of. He decided to study architecture every single Sunday at 8:00 a.m. without fail. He called me. We would talk about absolutely nothing for 40 minutes. And those calls were the anchor of my week. While Ethan was away at college, I quietly went back to school, community college first, paying out of pocket, then transferring to a 4-year program. I took night classes. I spent my entire weekends at the public library surrounded by towering stacks of tax law textbooks, while other women my age were going to bottomless brunches and taking weekend trips to Vegas for bachelorette parties. I was teaching myself double entry bookkeeping. I finished my degree at 30. I passed the CPA exam on my absolute first attempt. I got hired at Morrison & Klein, a prestigious mid-size firm, the 3rd largest in the state. I was nobody's charity case. I earned every single thing I had. Ethan graduated at 22 and immediately landed a job at a boutique architecture firm downtown. We celebrated with cheap takeout pizza at the exact same kitchen table where I had signed his guardianship papers all those years ago. Life was finally good. Then, 6 months later, he called me on a Wednesday, not our regular Sunday morning, and his voice sounded different. Breathless, nervous. Bridge, he said, I met someone. Her name was Paige Whitfield. They had met at a downtown gallery opening through a mutual friend. Ethan told me she was 25, studying interior design. Incredibly funny, deeply sweet, and absolutely smitten with him. I was thrilled for him, genuinely, truly happy. But Paige Whitfield's last name came with a zip code, a real one. The kind with gated communities, private country club memberships, and a father who built massive strip malls and mixed-use commercial developments across 3 state lines. The Whitfields lived in a completely different universe. And what I didn't know yet was that the Whitfield universe came with a very strict set of rules. The first and most important rule being people like me do not belong. The first time I met Gerald Whitfield, he didn't shake my hand. He measured it. It was about 6 months into Ethan and Paige's relationship, and I was invited to an intimate family dinner at the Whitfield estate. Estate is the only accurate word for it. It was a 6,000 square foot mansion behind wrought iron gates, featuring a circular driveway centered around a massive stone fountain that I was fairly certain cost more per month in water maintenance than my monthly rent. I wore a conservative navy blue dress I had found on the clearance rack at Nordstrom Rack. Before leaving my apartment, I fastened my father's watch around my wrist. It was an old Timex. The glass crystal was heavily scratched, and the leather band was worn incredibly soft from 20 years of grueling warehouse shifts. It was the only physical thing of his I wore it whenever I needed to feel brave. Gerald opened the heavy oak door himself. He was tall, with thick silver hair and the broad shoulders of a man who had never, not once in his life, been told the word no. He looked at my cheap dress first. Then his eyes flicked down to my father's battered watch. I physically saw his lips thin into a hard line. "So, what do you do, Bridget?" he asked, bypassing a greeting entirely. "I'm a financial analyst at Morrison & Klein." I said, keeping my chin up. "Interesting." He paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. "At which firm did you say?" I repeated the name. He nodded once, dismissively, then turned entirely away from me to speak to his wife, Diane, about the vintage wine he was decanting. Diane was 58, blonde, and meticulous. She had the kind of polished, surgical perfection that only real money can buy. She smiled at me, but it was the specific way people smile when they are actively counting your flaws. "That is a lovely little dress," she said, her tone dripping with polite condescension. "Is it new?" Paige laughed nervously, looking down at her shoes. Under the massive mahogany dining table, Ethan reached over and squeezed my hand. After dinner, Gerald pulled Ethan into his private study. I was standing in the cavernous hallway, pretending to admire a massive oil painting, when I heard fragments of their conversation drift through the heavy mahogany door. "Your sister, first impression, our guests, standards." I couldn't make out Ethan's muted replies, but I heard Gerald's tone perfectly. It was the tone of a man who wasn't asking for an opinion. He was issuing instructions. I drove home that night with the metal backing of the Timex pressing hard into my wrist. Gerald Whitfield didn't shake hands. He measured them, and that night, he had decided I came up hopelessly short. 4 months later, they were engaged. Paige called me herself to share the news. She sounded genuinely ecstatic, and I desperately wanted to believe that her joy was the only thing that mattered. But when the engagement party invitation arrived in the mail 3 weeks later, I noticed the agonizing little details. Country club attire, 120 guests. The envelope was sealed with a custom Whitfield family crest embossed in wax. Yes, this family literally had a logo. At the party, I was assigned to a tiny high-top table right next to the kitchen doors and the bar. That is event planner polite language for the back corner where you won't ruin the photos. Ethan was seated at the sprawling head table with Paige, Gerald, Diane, and a literal state senator's wife. There were 12 tables separating us. During the cocktail hour, Gerald worked the room like he was running for governor. I watched him introduce Ethan to every single business associate, every golf partner, every political connection. My future son-in-law. Gerald boomed, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. Self-made man, top of his class. He said it 4 times. I counted because I'm an accountant and counting is what I do. Not once did he mention who exactly raised this self-made man while he was supposedly building his class rankings out of thin air. Diane found me standing alone by the shrimp tower. She handed me a glass of sparkling water, not the expensive champagne the waiters were passing around, just water. Bridget, dear. A quick note, she said, leaning in. So her expensive perfume overwhelmed my senses. The rehearsal dinner next spring, Gerald's most important associates will be attending. I do hope you'll have something appropriate to wear. She patted my arm patronizingly. Just a thought. I smiled. I said thank you. I drank the sparkling water, but that night I sat in my beat up Honda Civic in the country club parking lot for 20 solid minutes. The engine was off. The radio was off. I was surrounded by a sea of pristine BMWs, Lexuses, and one Range Rover with a vanity plate. I opened my laptop on the passenger seat. I created a new secure folder on my desktop. I named it Receipts. I took a screenshot of a passive-aggressive text Diane had sent me earlier about my attire, and I dragged it into the folder. Then I drove home 3 weeks before the actual wedding. Gerald made his biggest move yet. He invited Ethan to a private lunch at a high-end downtown steakhouse. The kind of place with dark leather booths, cigar smoke, and $40 appetizers. Ethan came over to my apartment that evening. I was boiling pasta in my tiny kitchen. Ethan sat at the counter, picking nervously at a piece of garlic bread. He told me Gerald had offered him a position at Whitfield Properties, lead architect on a massive new mixed-use development in the suburbs. The salary was exactly double what Ethan was making at his current firm. It came with a corner office, a company car. Ethan, that's amazing. I said, and I genuinely meant it. It was a life-changing opportunity. Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes. There's a condition. He took a deep, shaky breath. He didn't say it outright. He's too smart to put it in words. But he kept talking about focus, about how a successful man needs to look forward, not backward, about how my sister would always serve as a reminder to people of exactly where I came from. The pasta sauce was bubbling violently. I reached over and turned the burner off. He tried to buy your loyalty. I said quietly, I turned it down. Bridge. Ethan said quickly. his voice cracking. It wasn't even a choice. It took me 5 seconds. I nodded. I just kept stirring the sauce. I didn't cry because crying wouldn't fix this. I had work to do. Later that same week, Gerald's personal assistant sent me an email. The subject line was helpful relocation resources. Attached were links to luxury apartment listings and job openings in Portland, Oregon, over 2,700 miles away. The implication wasn't exactly subtle. I forwarded the email directly into my receipts folder. Gerald Whitfield thought I was a pesky little problem he could just manage away with intimidation and geography. He clearly hadn't met a woman who filed tedious paperwork for a living and knew how to document a paper trail. 11 days before the wedding, I prepared a large, heavy manila envelope. The 9x12 kind I use at the firm when I need a difficult client to pay immediate attention. Inside, I placed 4 crisp physical documents, 1A certified copy of my CPA license issued by the state board, 2 my Morrison and Klein corporate employee badge, laminated, showing my photo, and Title 3, a formal commendation letter from a major corporate client whose company I had personally saved from a $2 million audit error the previous spring. 4, an official offer letter from my firm's partners, a promotion to senior manager, effective June 1st, pending my signature. I slid the thick envelope into the glove box of my Honda Civic. I didn't know if I would need it. I prayed to God I wouldn't, but I am an accountant. We plan for the worst case scenario. That Sunday, Ethan came over for our regular morning coffee. He sat on the couch, the exact same couch where I had slept for 6 years, so he could have a bedroom, and wrapped both his hands tightly around his mug. He looked exhausted. I'll be there. I told him before he could even speak, I will smile. I will be perfectly polite. I will sit at table 14 or table 40 or in the parking lot if they want me to. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot. Bridge, if he crosses the line in front of everyone, I am walking out and I'm not coming back. Don't you dare say that. I snapped gently. Paige is going to be your wife. This is your day. You are the reason I had a childhood instead of becoming a case number. We sat in the quiet for a long time. The rehearsal dinner was exactly what you would expect, held at the Whitfield estate. 40 guests, white linen, hundreds of candles, a live string quartet playing Debussy in the marble foyer. Gerald greeted every single guest by name. He remembered their children's ages, their summer vacation plans in the Hamptons, their precise wine preferences. He was a man who cataloged human beings the exact same way he cataloged his real estate investments entirely by their net value to him. When I arrived, Diane intercepted me before I could even take my coat off. Bridget, so glad you could make it. She purred, leaning in close. You look nice. Very practical. She grabbed my elbow and physically steered me to my seat. It was at the absolute farthest end of the longest table. Past the wealthy business partners, past the country club elite, past Ethan's frat brothers and Paige's sorority sisters. I was seated next to Gerald's former accountant's wife, who spent the entire 2 hours talking to me about her Peloton stats. During the toasts, Gerald stood up and raised his crystal glass To my daughter, he announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, the undisputed light of this family. He turned to Ethan, and to this incredible young man, a man who built himself from absolutely nothing, who showed up with nothing and earned his place at this table. He didn't look at me, not once, but I caught someone else looking at me. An older woman at the far end of the room. She had sharp silver hair, heavy reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, and dark, piercing eyes that seemed to be tracking the exact social dynamics of the room. She was sitting completely alone, and she was the only guest in the room who wasn't laughing at Gerald's terrible jokes. After the dinner concluded, Diane cornered me in the hallway near the coat closet. Her voice was suddenly low, stripped of its usual melodic politeness. Her grip on my elbow was actually painful. Tomorrow is Paige's day. She hissed, "Please, do not make it about you." I gently, deliberately removed her hand from my arm. I have never made a single thing in my life about me. Deanne, that is exactly the problem. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at 6:47 a.m. The face looking back at me was bone tired. Not the kind of tired that a double espresso fixes. The kind of tired that lives deep behind your eyes after 13 straight years of being the only person who handles the emergencies. I put on my dress, a navy blue tailored sheath dress I had bought on sale 6 weeks ago. It wasn't designer. It wasn't borrowed. It was mine. Paid for with my own money. And it fit me like armor. I fastened my father's scratched Timex around my wrist. It was worth $23 at a department store in 1998. And it was worth more to me than every single thing inside Gerald Whitfield's mansion. 13 years since you left. Dad. I thought, look what your boy became. The drive to the sprawling estate took 40 minutes. When I pulled up, the grounds had been utterly transformed. Massive white tents lined the manicured gardens. A small army of valet attendants in matching gold vests were sprinting back and forth. A massive, ornate sign at the entrance read, "The Whitfield Fuller Wedding" in swirling gold cursive. Although I noted dryly, the word Fuller was noticeably smaller than Whitfield. I parked my dusty Honda Civic right between a gleaming black Mercedes and a pristine Range Rover. I took a deep breath, grabbed a small black clutch purse, and stepped out. I had left the thick manila envelope locked in my car's glove compartment. I just needed my phone today. The ballroom was undeniably stunning. Italian marble polished to a mirror finish. Towering floral arrangements of white roses. Peonies and eucalyptus spilling elegantly out of massive silver urns. 200 white chairs with satin bows tied flawlessly to each one. I found my assigned table. Table 14. Last row. Far right corner. Literally 6 feet away from the swinging kitchen doors. I could actually hear the catering staff aggressively clanking metal trays and yelling out steak orders through the wall. I pulled out my chair. The name cards were arranged in a perfect semicircle around the floral centerpiece. Everyone else's card was propped up, facing outward, the gorgeous gold calligraphy visible from 3 feet away. Mine was placed face down. I looked around the table. Gerald's business partner's wife. A wealthy older couple I didn't recognize. An empty chair. Nobody at this table knew me. I reached out and picked up the heavy ivory cardstock. I flipped it over, and all the air violently left my lungs. Poor broke sister living off her brother. I read it twice. My brain struggled to process the cruelty of the beautiful. Elegant handwriting. This wasn't a prank pulled by a disgruntled caterer. This wasn't a typo by a careless printer. This was surgical precision. The woman next to me glanced over. Her eyes went wide. She slapped a hand over her mouth, and the laughter leaked out. She nudged her husband. He chuckled. The whisper spread. I stood up. I held the card between my thumb and forefinger. I looked straight through the crowd, past the roses and the charger plates, directly at the head table. Gerald was watching me. He raised his glass of Prosecco exactly half an inch. A salute. A dare. A measurement. His lips curved into that cruel, victorious smile. My heart was hammering at about 130 beats per minute, but my hands were completely steady. I refused to let 200 wealthy strangers see me tremble. I placed the card face up on the table, smoothing it flat with my palm. If he was going to try and shame me, he was going to have to do it where everyone could see his handiwork. I sat back down. I needed air. I excused myself and walked stiffly to the restrooms. They were lined with marble countertops and featured tiny cloth towels folded perfectly into fans. I locked the door, pressed my palms flat on the cold stone counter, and leaned forward until my forehead almost touched the mirror. Stay or go. If I leave, Gerald wins. He gets the clean narrative. The embarrassing poor sister is gone. Ethan marries into the Whitfield dynasty with no pesky reminder of food stamps and guardianship papers. But if I stay, I have to sit through my only brother's wedding with a name card that explicitly calls me a parasite, surrounded by people who think my poverty is a punchline. Before I could spiral further, the bathroom door opened. It was Diane. She had been drinking, not stumbling, but the rigid, perfect posture had softened slightly. She leaned against the doorframe, looking at me with something that almost resembled pity. "You know?" she said quietly, her voice slightly slurred. Gerald wasn't always like this. When we first married, we had nothing. He was kind. He wrote me little love notes on napkins. She stared at her own reflection, but then the real money came. And the money brought societal standards. And the standards, they brought rules. We had to adapt to survive in this circle. "Bridget, is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night?" I asked. My voice deadly calm. She flinched as if I had slapped her. "I am asking you, woman to woman, Bridget, just let it go. Let tonight be Paige's night. Don't make a scene. It's just a silly card. I'm not the one who printed that card and put it on the table. Diane." I replied, turning to face her fully, "You gave up your self-respect for a zip code and a chandelier. I didn't. You aren't trying to help me. You're trying to manage me." Diane's spine snapped straight. The fleeting moment of honesty vanished, swallowed instantly by the mask of the billionaire's wife. She spun on her heel and walked out without another word. I took a deep breath, fixed my cheap lipstick, and walked back out to the reception. When I returned to the ballroom, the cocktail hour was in full swing near the bar area. I was standing alone with a glass of tap water when a woman suddenly appeared beside me. It was the older woman from the rehearsal dinner, the one with the silver hair and the sharp eyes. "I saw your name card," she said bluntly. I tensed up. "Everybody saw my name card. My name is Lorraine," she said, letting the words hang in the air. "Lorraine Whitfield Caruso. I am Gerald's older sister." I stared at her, speechless. She reached into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out her smartphone. She opened her photo gallery and showed me a scanned picture of an old, faded photograph. The image showed a table setting. In the center was an ivory place card with the exact same gold calligraphy, the exact same heavy cardstock, and the exact same sweeping handwriting. The card in the photo read Gerald's embarrassment. "The teacher who married down 一天900wu," Lorraine said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "My own wedding. I married a high school shop teacher named Tom. He drove a beat-up pickup truck and coached junior varsity baseball for free. Gerald decided my husband was a liability to the brand. He had these made and placed them at every family member's seat at my reception." I looked at the phone, then at her. 30 years ago, same ink, same man. "What did you do?" I stayed quiet. She whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracking through her expensive makeup. "I didn't want to ruin the day. I took it. And because I took it, he knew he could control the narrative. He spent the next decade telling our parents I was unstable. He cut me out of the family business. I lost 8 years with my parents before they died because I was too polite to cause a scene." She reached out and gripped my hand with surprising strength. "I am 64 years old. I have nothing left to lose. But you still have time. Do not make my mistake." Something cold and resolute snapped into place inside my chest. "Where is his home office?" I asked. Lorraine smiled. A dangerous, sharp smile. "Down the west hallway, second mahogany door on the left." I slipped away from the crowd. The sprawling house was empty. Everyone was at the reception. I found Gerald's home office. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, sitting on a massive oak desk, was a wide format professional inkjet printer, the kind that easily handles heavy cardstock. I walked over. Sitting in the output tray was a piece of ivory paper, a test print. It read, "Poor broke sister, living off her brother." Clipped to the side of the tray was a handwritten note on Gerald's personal, monogrammed stationery. "Use the same font as the others. She will think it's from the wedding planner." He didn't just casually insult me. He had sat in this leather chair underneath an oil portrait of himself and meticulously planned my humiliation. He wanted me to blame the staff. He wanted me to feel utterly powerless. I pulled out my phone. I took 4 crystal clear photos of the test print, the printer, and the handwritten note. I didn't touch a single thing. I just put my phone in my pocket and walked straight out the back door of the estate, into the parking lot. I unlocked my Honda Civic, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out the thick manila envelope. I walked back into the ballroom just as dinner was concluding and the toasts were beginning. I sat at table 14. The envelope rested heavily on my lap. Gerald stood up. He clinked his silver dessert fork against his crystal glass. The entire room of 200 people instantly fell dead silent, turning their chairs like sunflowers, tracking the sun. I want to say a few words about family. Gerald boomed, his voice warm and practiced. The voice of a man who had successfully pitched billionaires for decades. He praised his daughter. He praised his own business empire. And then he turned his predatory gaze to Ethan. And Ethan, Gerald said, letting a dramatic pause fill the room, a young man who overcame unfortunate circumstances. He let the word circumstances hang in the air like a bad smell. We are so proud to welcome him into our family because this young man pulled himself up out of the gutter entirely by himself. Another heavy pause. By himself, Gerald repeated, louder this time. The room erupted into polite, wealthy applause. 200 crystal glasses rose into the air. Diane leaned across the head table and gently patted Ethan's arm. Gerald looked right at me in the back corner. The message was clear. I have erased you. I didn't clap. I just stood up from table 14, turned my back on the head table, and walked out the side doors into the garden. I needed to breathe. I needed the cold night air. A moment later, I heard the heavy doors swing open behind me. It was Ethan. He had completely abandoned the head table. His bow tie was undone. His face flushed with panic and anger. Bridge, hey, are you okay? I'm fine. I said, my voice eerily calm. You're not fine. I saw the card. He said, his voice tight, pacing the gravel path. Paige told me about it last night at 2:00 a.m. She was crying. She said her dad had them custom made. She begged him not to do it. She even tried to throw yours away, but he threatened to cut funding for the wedding if she intervened. Bridge, I almost called the whole wedding off last night. I stared at him, the boy I had given up my youth for, standing in a tuxedo that cost more than the couch I had slept on for 6 years, telling me he almost blew up his entire life for me. You knew I asked softly. I made Paige a promise. Ethan said, his jaw locked hard, looking exactly like our late father. I told her that if Gerald did one more thing tonight, one single thing, I was going to stand up in front of everyone and end it. He just stood up there and pretended you didn't exist. So I need you to tell me what to do. I looked down at the manila envelope in my hands. Then I pulled out my phone and swiped to the photos. I'm not going to cause a scene. I told him, handing him the phone, but I am not going to be erased. What you do with this information is your choice. Ethan looked at the screen. He saw the test print. He saw the handwritten note on the monogram stationery. I watched his face cycle through shock, deep betrayal, and finally, a cold, hard fury. Then I handed him the manila envelope. Open it. He pulled out the documents. He read my certified CPA license. He looked at my corporate badge. He read the commendation letter about the $2 million save. And finally, he read the official promotion to senior manager. He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. You didn't tell me about the promotion. I was going to surprise you tomorrow at brunch. I whispered, I didn't raise you so you could sit at a head table and watch me be humiliated. Ethan carefully placed the documents back into the envelope. He held it in his hands like it was something sacred. You're right, he said softly. You didn't. And I'm not going to watch it happen. He turned on his heel and marched straight back into the ballroom. I followed him. The music was playing a soft jazz tune. People were chatting, sipping their $1,000 wine. Ethan didn't go back to his seat. He walked straight past his terrified-looking new wife. He walked past a suddenly pale Diane. He marched directly to the DJ booth, whispered something to the DJ, and took the microphone. The music cut with a loud scratch. Excuse me. Ethan's voice boomed through the massive speakers, cutting through the chatter like a knife. I'd like to say a few words. A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was completely off the meticulously planned schedule. Gerald's arrogant smile instantly vanished, replaced by a tight warning glare. He sat up straight, buttoning his jacket. Ethan stood in the center of the dance floor. He was holding the manila envelope in his left hand. I stood near the back, 15 feet from the exit doors. I wasn't planning to speak again tonight. Ethan began, his voice rock steady, but my father-in-law said something during his toast that I need to publicly correct. He said I pulled myself up by myself, that I came from nothing. The room was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. That is a lie. Ethan said clearly. Gerald physically jolted in his chair. Diane reached for his arm, but he violently shook her off. When I was 11 years old, my father died. Ethan continued, his voice carrying to the very back of the hall. The state was going to put me in foster care, but one person stopped it. She was 19 years old. She dropped out of college. She worked 2 jobs filing plumbing invoices by day, tutoring math by night just so I could sleep in a real bed. She slept on a broken couch for 6 straight years so I could have a future. Ethan pointed directly to the back of the room, at me. 200 heads whipped around to stare. That person is my sister, Bridget. She is sitting at table 14, tucked away by the kitchen. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the hateful Ivory Place card. And this is what was waiting at her seat tonight. He held it up to the microphone and read it aloud, his voice dripping with venom. Poor broke sister living off her brother. The gasps from the wealthy crowd were genuine. A woman near the front actually covered her mouth in horror. My father-in-law custom ordered this. Ethan said, ignoring Gerald, who was now standing up, his face purple with rage. Ethan opened the manila envelope. So I'd like to introduce you to the broke sister. This is her certified CPA license. He tossed it onto the nearest guest table. People scrambled to look at it. This is her corporate badge. She is a top analyst at Morrison & Klein. He threw it on the table, and this is her promotion letter to senior manager. Effective next week. Ethan looked directly at Gerald, locking eyes with the billionaire. You said I built myself from nothing. You are wrong. I was built by Bridget Fuller. She paid for my school supplies with tip money. She drove me to college in a car with a cracked windshield. And if you ever disrespect her again, if you ever try to erase her to make your brand look better, you lose a son-in-law. Ethan, that is enough, Gerald roared. Slamming his fist on the table, the billionaire completely lost his composure. I paid for this wedding. Every flower, every plate, every glass of champagne. You do not speak to me this way in my own house. He doesn't have to, a sharp voice echoed from across the room. It was Lorraine. She stood up from her lonely table. She was holding her phone high in the air, the screen glowing brightly with the photo of the 1995 place card. You did this to me 30 years ago. Gerald, Lorraine shouted, her voice trembling but incredibly loud. Same cardstock, same handwriting. You called me an embarrassment because my husband wasn't rich enough for your country club friends. I sat down and took it for 30 years. I am done sitting. Gerald's face drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine. He looked at Diane, silently begging for backup. But Diane was staring firmly at her lap, refusing to make eye contact. He looked at his daughter. Paige was openly weeping, but she wasn't looking at her dad. She was looking at Ethan with total awe, the man who had spent 3 decades controlling every narrative, every room, and every person he encountered was standing completely, utterly exposed, and nobody was coming to save him. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I walked slowly across the dance floor, my cheap heels clicking against the expensive marble. I walked right up to my brother. He reached out and grabbed my hand. His fingers brushed against my father's scratched Timex watch. Dad would be so proud of you. He whispered. I looked at the crowd, 200 wealthy faces staring at us in stunned silence. I didn't make a grand speech. I just walked over to the head table, picked up the hateful place card from Ethan's hand, and set it down gently right in front of Gerald Whitfield's plate. You can keep this, I said quietly. You clearly need it more than I do. Ethan and I turned around and walked out. It was exactly 47 steps to the ballroom doors. I counted them halfway down the aisle. We heard the sharp clack of heels following us. It was Lorraine. 3 people walking out of a 200-person gala. As we pushed through the double doors, a single person started clapping, then another. By the time we hit the night air, scattered. Hesitant applause was ringing out through the hall. We got into my dusty Honda Civic, Ethan in the passenger seat, still in his custom tuxedo, Lorraine in the back. Adjusting her reading glasses, I started the engine and drove us away from the mansion. Not looking in the rearview mirror once, the fallout was spectacular, and it was swift. By Sunday morning, Ethan's phone had blown up with frantic texts. Paige had issued her father an ultimatum, mandatory family therapy, and a sincere public apology to both Ethan and me. Or she and Ethan were cutting contact completely, to my utter shock. Paige held her ground. She moved out of the luxury apartment her dad paid for and into a small rental with Ethan. But the real damage wasn't just familial. Someone at table 14, a guest who was utterly disgusted by the stunt, had taken a photo of my place card before Ethan even gave his speech. By Monday morning, that photo along with Lorraine's 1,995 photo, was circulating wildly in local high society Facebook groups and community chats. Gerald's brand was built on being the perfect philanthropic family man. The internet loves nothing more than exposing a hypocrite. The story leaked to a local digital news outlet. By Tuesday, 2 major business associates quietly canceled lucrative meetings with Whitfield Properties. A massive real estate development deal Ethan had mentioned fell through because the investors didn't want the bad PR of working with a man going viral for emotional abuse. Gerald's country club buddies suddenly found themselves too busy for their weekly golf games. His money couldn't buy his way out of the social pariah status he had built for himself. As for me, I signed my promotion letter on Monday. My managing partner shook my hand and told me it was long overdue. Ethan and Paige are in counseling. Learning how to build a marriage without Gerald's shadow looming over them. And every Sunday morning, Ethan still comes over to my apartment. He sits on my new, comfortable couch, and we drink coffee. Here's the life lesson I want you to take away from this chaos. Your worth is not dictated by the people who desperately need you to feel small. People like Gerald Whitfield use money, status, and cruelty as weapons because they are terrified of people they cannot buy. They want you to believe that your struggles, your worn out shoes, and your cheap watches make you inferior. But the truth is, the grit it takes to survive the things that would break them is exactly what makes you unbreakable. Never let anyone else write your name card. You know exactly who you are, and you know exactly what it took to get you here. Stand up, speak your truth, and never be afraid to walk out of a room that doesn't respect your value. Thank you so much for reading and watching this story unfold. If you found any inspiration in this, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time you had to stand up to someone who tried to belittle you. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about standing your ground. Stay strong. And I'll see you in the next one.